And thank you very much to my good friends Pat and Elena of the band Tennis for that song, for that intro music. It is from their song, Need Your Love. And with that, welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I've interviewed over 500 songwriters about their songwriting process. By way of background, I am a former English literature professor. I have a PhD in English language and literature. So I'm a writer myself, and I've always been interested in treating songwriters the same way that we treat prose writers, as writers, plain and simple. We are laser focused strictly on the nuts and bolts of the songwriting process. I don't care about how bands get their name, tour stories, favorite foods, or anything like that. You can find that anywhere else. This is a deep dive into the songwriting process. I'd really like to think of this more as an intelligent conversation between two writers rather than a straight-up interview format. So with that, check out this episode. And today on the pod, the return of Jim James of My Morning Jacket. I interviewed James a few years ago, at least 5 years ago. So this is the second time. I will link to the first interview. That was before I was doing a podcast, and I was only transcribing interviews. James's latest album is called Wowed Out, his solo album, his first in 8 years. He also produced it. Obviously, these are podcasts, but he was at home when we did this, and he's big wall of books, bookshelf behind him, which I love to see, which certainly, as you listen to the interview, it's apparent how much other types of art have on his creative process. That influence is deep. We talk a lot about the importance of art galleries to his creative process, and also reading. Voracious reader, voracious consumer of art, and it certainly shows up in his lyrics. That's all I'm going to say. You know Jim James of My Morning Jacket, so I will let you listen. Again, the latest album is called Wowed Out, my interview with Jim James. So I'm going to start with a quote. I've got some quotes from writers, and Dorothy Parker, the writer, said, "I hate writing. I love having written." So, and I love that quote because I'd love to, someone who writes, I'd love to think that I sit down and I go, wow, I can't wait to write today. So how often does that happen to you where you feel the urge? I mean, where you feel like there's an untold story that I need to get out?
That's the beautiful thing really about writing for me is the work comes easy when I want to work. I can't force myself to work. But if the spirit moves me and it starts speaking, you can't pull me away from it. It's like I just like get in there and it keeps flowing and flowing. But then other times if it's not flowing, I'll look at the studio or look at my guitar or whatever and be like, I wonder if I'll ever pick that thing up again. I wonder if I'll ever write another song again, but then now I've gotten, I don't want to say wise, but I've gotten knowledgeable enough to know I don't get stressed anymore or bummed anymore if it's not flowing. Cause I know chances are if the last, 20 or 30 years proves anything, it comes in waves, and rather than me getting stressed out that I'm not creating anything new or I'm not, if I just let it go and forget about it and go about other things, it'll come back when it's ready to come back.
So there's no anxiety there if you find that after a few days or weeks or anything, it's not happening.
No, there used to be. I felt like I used to have to keep creating and keep cracking the whip. And, as a younger person, there's this invisible illusion of a ladder that we think we all have to climb to get somewhere, and the deep, fractured capitalism that's in most of our brains, where we think we're going to climb some ladder and we're going to have quote unquote success and we're going to quote unquote get somewhere, and all this stuff that you think is going to happen. And I think if you're lucky enough to grow or mature or live long enough, you kind of realize what they always say, the journey is the destination and there is no destination. All that stuff is so true, but you really don't believe it for so long. You have to find it out on your own that it's true. But there's never anywhere that you're going to get. You're already there now, and you're going to keep I love, I just heard this Bob Dylan quote. He was talking about aging recently, and he said, "Time stands still and we move through it." And I thought that was really cool. It made me kind of look at time in a different way. We're kind of growing and, it's just sitting there and we're moving through it. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Do you do a lot of any journal writing?
I don't. I've tried so many times to journal and I can't. I'm very allergic to busy work. Like I don't like rehearsing, I don't like practicing, I don't like sound check, I don't like journaling. I don't like repetitive busy work, but I love working when I'm inspired. If I'm inspired and things are speaking, I'll write and write and write and write and write and write and write. But a lot of times, and that's no, I'm not, obviously not throwing shade on anybody who loves to journal. Everybody's got their own process. You read about people like Stephen King or whatever that they go in every day and they sit down and they write and they write and they write. And Dave Eggers was talking about that when I was talking to him about his new book, and he was kind of saying he'll sit down every day and write for 8 hours, and out of those 8 hours, he might have an hour's worth of stuff that he finds usable. But I've just never, my brain has never worked that way because I don't, if I sit down but nothing's inspiring me or nothing's speaking to me, nothing's coming out. Sometimes I wish I had that ability to just sit there and somehow keep churning out stuff. But I think it's different kind of as a songwriter than like say a novelist or something like that, where if you're a novelist, you may have an idea in your mind of a story arc or the characters or whatever. And, I love how Stephen King talks about that too, about how the characters will just start talking in his mind, and the whole thing will just start playing, and he's just dictating it. He's just typing it in as it all comes to him. But, I mean, I think too, if you look at the content of a novel versus the content of an album, there's far less words in an album, even if it's a Bob Dylan album or whatever that has tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of words. There's, yeah, so I've never been able to work that way.
I don't know why that is. I mean, you're right. You can read endless interviews with novelists who no novelists would ever say, I write when I feel like it. It's always butt in the seat, gotta write.
Yep.
No matter how bad it is, you got to do it. But songwriters don't have, and I feel like songwriters are almost unique in that because think with most creative outputs, there's that idea that you should be doing something every day. And I don't know the answer to that, but songwriters seem to be unique as far as waiting for the inspiration rather than sitting down every day.
I think everybody's different, and I think it's just a matter of listening to your heart. Because I think your heart will tell you your gut or your conscience or your soul or whatever. Because some people work really well that way. Some people do Nashville style songwriting where they sit down with somebody else at a table for hours and hours, and they crank out verse after verse, and they look at it and they're like, that doesn't work. Whatever. What happens next? They look at it. There's so many different ways to look at it. And I don't think there is any wrong or right way. It's like I just kind of know from experience. And I love the mystery of the universe too, because who knows, maybe 2 years from now, something will flip and my soul will tell me, start writing every day, Jim. And I'll try and sit down and type and type and type, because there's no rules. And maybe I'll do that someday.
Are you a seasonal writer? And by seasonal, I mean the literal seasons. So here's why I ask. I had Kevin Drew from Broken Social Scene on recently, and he said we were talking about his theory was that people on the East Coast are more productive because you have defined seasons, whereas if the weather is nice all the time, there's not this less inspiration. And it got me thinking. I think his quote was, "We should see how many disco albums were made in the winter when you're practically." Shut in. So, have you ever thought about whether you're more productive in certain seasons?
No, and I would say that's definitely not true. It could be true for him, and again, I'm not
Yeah.
throwing shade at him, but like somewhere like LA for me has been a great finishing place. Like I can be so creative in LA where it's kind of summer year round, and there's no dramatic seasonal shift. Um, but then it's like I travel so much, and Louisville, where I live primarily, has all four seasons, dramatically. And yeah, to me, it's just been about flow And it's really I don't understand it, because it's not even about like I'm happy or I'm sad or it's summer or it's winter. There's really almost nothing to do with it, because I feel like I've been heartbroken before and not creative, and I've been heartbroken and the heartbreak songs are pouring out, or vice versa. I've fallen in love, no content is coming out, and then I've fallen in love another time, tons of love songs are spraying out. It's like there's almost no at least for me, there is no rhyme or reason to it that I can understand.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I had Lucinda Williams on a couple months ago, and she said that she could never write about, she had to be content to write about a dark place. She can write about the darkness, but she has to be in a happy place to be able to write about it. And I think that's speaks to more of the distance element, how important distance is. I mean, Hemingway famously said he couldn't write about Paris when he was in Paris. So, how important is distance to you to that process?
God, I mean, Lucinda is such a great songwriter. I think I put Lucinda in the same category as like a John Prine or something like that. They are storytellers who can paint you the most vivid picture of a story that comes to life in your mind's eye, and I have so much respect for that type of songwriter. I feel like I'm not really that type of songwriter. I'm more like an abstract visual artist or something, because to me it's like it's more about puzzles and wordplay and arrangements and poetry, and it's kind of like, if you and I go look at a Rothko painting at the museum, we're going to see two completely different things. We're going to come where you're going to see one thing, I'm going to see another thing. And that's kind of how I look at songwriting, because it's like sometimes I want the listener to understand what I'm saying, but other times I don't really care if they do or not, and or I know that they're going to see something different, or sometimes I don't even know what it is, but there's some image that's created. It's really visual for me too, because it's like when I'm really into a song, there's a visual image that's happening in my brain that's very pleasing. And to me, everything about the painting is the way the reverb's hitting the vocals and the way all the backing vocals sound and the way the drums sound and the way it's all this thing where it's like, I'm not the kind of songwriter like a Lucinda or a John Prine or whatever that I like. If we go and look at one of their paintings, it's like looking at a Rembrandt or something, where we're both looking at this beautiful painting of a person and we're like, oh my God, this is like blowing my mind. Look at their hat, look at their hair, look at their face. It's so real. Um, and again, it's like, I don't think either is better or worse. They're just different schools of thought or whatever. And I always am open to that too. Like, I hope maybe someday the universe will want me to have a Rembrandt period or whatever, where I can like lucidly write you a story about, something concretely as visual as, a Dylan or a Joni Mitchell or a Lucinda or a John Prine or somebody like that can write.
And I don't know the answer to this, and I'm not expecting we can come up with one, but I'm fascinated by the idea that when we're in a euphoric state, our response is never "let me write." Why is it that sadness tends to elicit, for a lot of people, that desire to write, but no one's first response when they're in a great mood is "I'm going to write about it." Um, I don't know why that is, but I've never talked to anyone who says, "Yeah, like that's my first response when I'm in a good place."
I don't know. I found that to be different because I do feel like, especially when you're younger, and you also were sold the myth of the Kurt Cobain and the Brian Wilson and the Sid Barrett and the tragic figures, who create this great art. And they do create great art. There's no arguing that. And they were troubled and they're shooting heroin and they're out of their mind and they're in the insane asylum or whatever. I think the romance of that sweeps a lot of us away, and I think for me, the romance of that contributed to my own alcoholism and my own destructive behavior over the years. And I've found, because for me, one of the coolest things I found is, uh, by the end of before I quit drinking, I was so resentful of all of my old music. I was like, I don't want to play the music I wrote when I was 20. I don't want to play the music I'm 22. But, I'm lucky enough to play in this rock band where people still want to come see us play these songs, right? But I'm like, I couldn't do it. I was getting close to the point where I was like, I can't do this anymore. But then the happier I've gotten, the more peace I've made with myself. It's like now I am able to go visit those old selves and it doesn't bother me anymore. Like I'm honored to hold that 22-year-old Jim and sing his song, even though I don't feel that way anymore. Life has changed. I'm 48-year-old Jim, but I step into the shoes of the 25-year-old Jim or whatever. And it's a joyous experience for me now. Whereas when I was tortured, it was very difficult, and I feel like songwriting's the same thing, it's like, I feel like the songs I'm working on now and, the solo record I just made and the, Jacket record we're working on now and the, last Jacket record and everything I've made since I've been sober from alcohol, I don't, I'm so in love with it, and it's up to the world to decide what stays around, what doesn't. 100 years from now, will we be completely forgotten, or will the world only be listening to one song I ever made? Will I even be lucky enough to stay around that long? Who knows? It's like everything's forgotten eventually, but in our lifetime, you know, it's who knows what'll last or what'll stick around. But in my heart, I love creating more than I've ever loved creating, and I'm happier than I've ever been, and I'm more peaceful than I've ever been about the whole thing.
I want to get back to the art gallery thing because, again, quoting Hemingway, Hemingway said all writers should go to art galleries to get inspired.
Yeah.
So, do you find that visual art is a source of inspiration for your music?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things on tour is going to the art museums, and going to the natural history museums. And, because I love, I'm a big reader, I'm a big visual learner, and I love visual art and I love painting myself and stuff like that. And I love, there's one of my favorite things to do on tour is to put in my headphones and find the art gallery, and just go spend the day looking at things with great music going on in my ears, especially if I'm working on something still on tour. I've done some of my best work in the art gallery where I'm listening to rough mixes of what I'm currently working on. And I'm walking around like looking at the paintings and stuff and taking notes, and I'm hearing the music differently. And I'm like, oh shit, let's add this later, add that later, or oh, let's change this. It walking and yeah, visual art and nature too, walking around in nature directly changes the art and the songwriting for me.
So, is it the visual? Because I've heard visual art, people go to art galleries, they're inspired by the titles, the descriptions, or it's the paintings. So, is one of those more inspiring to you than the other?
Definitely the art. I usually don't even look at the the titles of the cards. I've been trying to be better about it lately because people want to talk about it and they're like, "What'd you see?" And I'm like, "Oh my god, I saw this insane painting." It's like I'm trying to describe it, and they're like, "Oh, who was it? Was it Pollock or was it Rothko?" And I'm like, "God, I have no idea. I couldn't tell you." So I've been trying to take pictures of the cards lately. If I like something. But yeah, usually it's just the visual image. And it's funny, it's kind of the same in music too, because most of my favorite music, the lyrics don't really hit me at first. You know what I mean? It's more about the wave of the music or whatever, and then later on I get into the lyrics.
Is there a period of art that inspires you the most? A period or a type? Or I guess what do you what you get into the art gallery? What are you heading for first?
Definitely like modern abstract art is my favorite. I love it all. There's cool stuff in every wing of the art museum, but that's definitely my favorite is the more weird the better. The stuff that makes you stop and just be like, what in the fuck is happening here? Like what are they doing? Like that's my favorite feeling.
So, have you ever been in there and you're immediately inspired to write?
No, I don't think so. I haven't like immediately been like, oh, I gotta write a song. But it does shape what I'm working on. That's something I love when I'm listening to rough mixes of things that are unfinished. It it does come out in that way. Like I'm like, oh my god, a guitar solo pops in my head, or something pops in my head. But I don't usually sit there and then, oh god, I gotta go rush back and grab a guitar because a song just popped out. That doesn't usually happen.
I've got actually a anecdote for you. I interviewed Jason Newsted about a month ago, and he's a visual artist also. So what he told me he does, which it kind of blew my mind was he will write lyrics on the blank canvas from another artist. He actually talked about he wrote a lyric from a Jim Croce song on a canvas and then painted over it because
Whoa,
those lyrics inspired him as he looked at them and read them. That's what inspired him to paint. I thought that was pretty cool that the lyrics are actually under there because
I
that's
love
what he
that.
starts with. Yeah, isn't
That's
that
great.
cool?
That's a great idea. I love that idea.
There you go. Um, so do you have just thousands of voice memos on your phone with ideas?
Yeah, I've got so many ideas. It's like I get so many ideas in my sleep, in dreams and stuff, and I miss a lot of them because I'm too tired to get to the voice memo. But I try to get as many as I can, and then life is so busy, and a lot of those I get when I don't have any time to work on them, or I've got to do something the next day. But I feel like I've got this cool deal with the universe, with my muse or whatever, that there's this respect there that as long as I'm present enough to capture the seed, I can work on it when I can. You know what I mean? That's kind of our agreement, and I think that's pretty great because if I don't get the seed, it's gone. If I wake up and have a song from a dream, if I don't roll over and sing it into my phone, it's gone forever. But if I save it, I can go back to it and on it when I have the time.
Now, is there a filing system to those voice memos? Is there any organization?
Oh my god! I mean, it's great because I just go through them. When it's like I go through them and I half of them I can't even tell what I'm saying or there are no words. It's like blah blah blah. And I'm like try to give it some title, and I start pulling them out of the voice memos into a folder, and I just put like 1 or 2 stars near the ones I really like, to kind of give those some priority when I go back in and dig in. So yeah, then once I've got them all in another folder, then I'll start jumping in, and if I learn one, then I'll kind of like record a demo of it that becomes more real or whatever, and then I'll throw that file into the already done folder or whatever, so that I kind of know I'm making my way through them. But yeah, it takes a lot of time to sit there and go through them.
Do you ever mix and match
What's
the, you know, well, mix and do you ever mix and match? Like, do you ever go through a voice? I'm gonna match this voice memo with another voice memo.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's been so many cool times that especially with the jacket when we're doing records and stuff, if we're working on a song that feels incomplete or oftentimes like a 30-second voice memo idea will start becoming everybody's favorite song on the record, but it's missing something. And yeah, a lot of times I'll go digging through other voice memos, searching for like something that feels akin to it. And I'd say that works half the time. Most of the time, again, you can't force it. There's a lot of times oh, this one's so cool. Let's see, and we're trying it. And it's like, I kind of love that about the whole thing when you zoom out from it all. At least for me, it's like the universe is present and it has the final say. It says what works and what doesn't, and I kind of love that.
I want to go back to the sleeping part because there was a study I read. This was in the past 5 or 10 years, and they actually replicated this with creatives, but it was something that Salvador Dali started with. So it's that state that you're in, the hypnagogic state when you're not asleep, but you're not awake. It's that kind of dreamy part. So there's a picture of Salvador Dali. Here's what he would do. He would sit in this uncomfortable chair with his hand outstretched and a skeleton key in his hand. And then when he would drift off, the key would drop, it would make a noise, it'd wake him up, he'd immediately start to paint.
Yep, I've heard that. Yeah.
And they replicated that with creatives in the lab and found that for whatever reason, that state that we're in is a productive state. So I don't know if you mentioned that, but do you find that is a productive state? Not when you're waking up in the middle of the night, but when you're in that kind of dreamy state.
I've never tried the key on the plate experiment. I love the romantic idea of that. I think my equivalent is like if I take a nap in the afternoon or whatever, I keep my voice memo there. And if I have that kind of wake up or whatever, and I have an idea, I'll record it into the voice memo and I'll kind of say to myself jokingly, like, the key just hit the plate, you just dropped the key onto the plate.
Oh,
But
so
I
you've
have
actually
so,
heard that. You've heard that
yeah,
study then. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've had such a hard time sleeping, and it takes a Herculean effort for me to fall asleep. So if I sat in a chair with a key, holding a key over a plate, I would never fall asleep. I never, even I would die before I fell asleep. It takes like a cryogenic chamber, a soundless environment, all this stuff for me to even remotely start falling asleep.
Now my favorite quote that I always give songwriters, Agatha Christie said, "The best time to write a book is when you're doing the dishes." So the idea that when our ideas come to us when our brains are engaged in monotonous activities. So I've heard things like folding laundry, gardening, vacuuming, taking a shower. That when your brains are engaged in those unconscious activities, that's when the ideas bubble up. So how often does that happen to you? I think the trick is you can't force it because if you say, I'm going to go wash the dishes, it's not going to happen. But how often do the eureka moments happen when you're engaged in that monotonous activity?
Oh God, all of the time. I mean, that is the most beautiful thing about, I think that's the practice of letting go. If we can let go, things will pop out here and there. Yeah, if I'm walking around cleaning up the house, or if I'm out at dinner, it'll come to me at the table, and I'll go to the bathroom and sing it into my voice memo. That's probably my favorite thing about the invention of the smartphone is the voice memo app. Because you've kind of always got this capturing device with you. So yeah, walking a lot, happens to me. Or yeah, you're just in these areas where I'm not sitting at a table with a guitar going, come on, God damn it, come out, song, come out, give me a great song right now, let's see what it does. It's like, I think that's so true because yeah, you're taking all the pressure off and you're just washing the dishes or whatever, and some great idea comes to your head. And I think that's where we have to do the work to be present enough to capture it. Put down the dishes, go write it down, or sing it into your voice memo, or whatever, however you want to capture it, because I think that's the contract with the universe, with most creatives. Like the universe is going to give you something, and if you don't act on it, it's going to go away. It's gonna float off somewhere else. And I think so. It's our job to do that dance, with the universe, and accept what it gives us.
I was songwriters who, before the invention of the cell phone, uh, the people around back when they had answering machines, what they would do is they would, and I remember this, I'm old enough to remember this, they would call their phone when they were on tour, leave a message, and then when they get home, hit play, and there's an hour's worth of ideas on there.
That's great, man. That's amazing.
I think Mary Chapin Carpenter told me that she would do that. That was her thing.
That's
She'd
such a
come
good idea.
back, right, with like an hour's worth of ideas. Um, so what about the role of movement then, whether it is independent of the dishes and all that kind of stuff, but whether it's hiking or walking or biking, um, how important is that to your process?
Oh, it's so important. I mean, it's nothing would get finished without that. I need that to finish. If I get an idea and I'm working on it and I'm cultivating it or whatever, half the process for me is printing a rough mix of it or listening to the voice memo or whatever and taking a walk with it. And that for me keeps the idea flowing. It's just kind of like getting your blood flowing or whatever. If you sit stagnantly for too long and you don't exercise, at least for me, and I think for everybody, kind of, you start to get stagnant, and your energy isn't moving. And for me, that with the songs, it's the same thing. If I don't take them out for a walk, they don't get finished.
So literal, that's what you do. You go out, you go, okay, now it's time to take a walk. You go out, listen to it, and then that's the ideas kind of happen there.
Yep, literally, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I use that as a part of my process every day. I mean, I'm with you on that as I believe so strongly in the role of exercise for many reasons, but so many ideas I get while I am, hiking or running or something like that. I mean, it's amazing. Um, have you ever been I read recently this was genetic whether we are morning people or night people. Have you been a right through the night type of person?
I'm definitely a night person because I just can't fall asleep. But I love working during the day. Um, I work at night too. I don't really have any set rules, but I am more of a night owl just 'cause I can't fall asleep. Sometimes I wish I could be a morning person because most of the people I know are morning people, and there's so many things that the world wants you to do, at 9 or 10 a.m. that you, like, have to do somehow, but if you haven't fallen asleep till 5 a.m., it's kinda hard to wake up in time to be somewhere at 9 a.m., it's like the, so but that isn't, Yeah, it's funny, man. It's like if I'm working on something, I'll work on it all day and all night. And if I'm not working
Really?
on anything, I won't go in the studio at all. I won't pick up a pen. I won't pick up a guitar for weeks or months. And then if I'm working on it, you can't get me out of there. I'm obsessed with being in there.
Now you said pen. When it comes to lyrics, are you a pen and paper person or a
No, mostly a computer person, but sometimes I write and I like to draw and stuff like that. But mostly with things now. I love the flexibility of the notes app. Again, if I'm out somewhere and I'm working on lyrics, if I'm on a walk, it's amazing. I've got my lyrics going. I'm listening to my rough mix I just made and uploaded to Dropbox or whatever, and I'm like on a walk listening to it, and I'm like listening to it, and I'm like, oh God, that one lyric could be this. And I just go in the notes app and change the lyric right there, and next time I go back home and I sing it again. It's like I love that part about. That's one of my favorite things about technology.
I interviewed the writer Anthony Doerr. He wrote a book called All the Light We Cannot See.
Yeah, I love him.
Amazing book, yeah. And I asked him about writer's block, and he goes, "I don't believe in writer's block. Writer's block is a failure of courage." And
Interesting.
that quote has always stuck with me because his whole thing was, don't be afraid to write the bad stuff, and you're not that special. Everyone has something to say.
Yep.
So I'd love to get your take on that. I guess there's a lot of ways, right? Do you believe in writer's block, or maybe is writing a bad song better than writing no song? How do you feel about that idea in general?
I don't know. I don't know. I respect him so much. Unbelievable. One of our great modern authors. So I'm not saying what he's saying isn't true, but that isn't true for me. It used to be when I believed more in the concept of I don't know, the suffering artist or the tortured artist. There'd be periods where I'm like, I'm suffering from writer's block or whatever, and the more I've stepped back from it, and I'm like, even if I stopped today, I've had such a beautiful relationship with the universe of creating all of this music that I care about so much and I love so much. Even if another song never came to me, I would bow down to the universe in gratitude, and I would try to find something else to do. I would try to find another path. But when I was younger, in different portions of my life, I would be in agony. I'd be go, "Oh, I'm suffering from writer's block. I can't do it. I'm a failure. I'll never be able to do anything." And it's like, and I can't, what he's saying doesn't really apply to me because, again, I can't sit there and force something to come. Like
Mhm.
I've got to have some seed from the universe to start something. So if I don't have anything, I can't grab the guitar and sit there and write a terrible song. It's the listener can decide if the songs I've written are terrible or great on their own. But I can't write anything. And then if I don't like it, I don't release it. So I've got piles and piles of songs I've worked on that I didn't like that much or that didn't get finished that are just sitting on hard drives or tapes or whatever. But it's like, I don't I usually don't release anything, but I've created a lot of things that I didn't think were that good. But yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with them on that part that like the creation should happen. But all those times though, as I worked on each of those songs, for those moments, I was obsessed with that piece of music, and I loved working on that piece of music. So that's the thing about the art for me is I can't make it happen. I might decide
Mhm.
once I'm done that it didn't work or, it wasn't a good idea or whatever. But yeah, I don't really believe in writer's block 'cause I think if you're suffering from writer's block, you should go find something else to do. You should
Yeah.
be grateful to be alive. Go take a walk in the woods or go paint a picture or go give your friend a hug or you know what I mean? Like there's so many things in this world to do. I think as artists, one of the things we can do to make the world a better place is get out of our own fucking way. You know what I mean? And just try to like love ourselves and love the world and not get all bent out of shape if you're not uh creating like you want to in that moment of time.
There's a great story about Joseph Conrad, the writer, who wrote his cousins like a 12-page letter complaining about writer's block, missing the irony that he just wrote a 12-page letter about writer's block.
Right, right.
I would always tell my students when I was a professor that writer's block happens not because we don't know what to say, but because we don't know where to begin. I think that it's because there's almost too much up there, and we don't know where to start. Like, I just don't think that the mind is blank. I think that we almost think about we have to start at the beginning. I would tell my students, start wherever the hell you have the most to say, and you just need that momentum. That's the way I look at it. Rather than, oh my gosh, my mind is blank. There's nothing there.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. I do think one thing that I try to realize, and that I've only realized the last couple of years, the more I can forget about Jim and Jim's agenda and Jim's ego, and the more I can let the universe speak through me, the better the art is and the easier it is, you know? The more I get upset or I get happy or I cling to this or I cling to that, and then the more I'm worried about this character that I'm playing right now called Jim, you know, and Jim's sad because he didn't do this, or Jim's happy because he did do this, the more I can kind of like step back and just deal with what is, you know, like, because that's the thing too. I think we miss that point. Like shit is happening, you know, like it's happening whether you want it to or not. And it's like, how do you deal with it, with what's happening, rather than moaning and groaning about what you wish was happening? You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the thing about art. Instead of moaning and groaning about your writer's block or whatever, or what your ego thinks, you know, you should be writing the next great American novel or the next great Pet Sounds or whatever, you know, the more I think you can get out of your head about that and listen to what the universe is doing in your life, I think that will steer you to better art and to more peace and happiness in your life.
All right, switching gears slightly. The song that comes to you, lightning in a bottle. What 15 minutes? There's always those stories I hear. Do you trust those songs? Do you feel, or do you not touch those songs? The songs that happen the fastest, are those the ones that get the least amount of editing afterwards?
I don't know. You know, it's funny. It's by the time we release an album or I release an album or whatever, I've listened to it so many times in so many different orders, in so many different ways, that by the time I'm listening to by the time even before mastering, it's like, I usually know what songs aren't working, and for me, it's not even so much about the writing of the song or the recording of the song. For me, it's about taking a walk and listening to the rough mixes in in my headphones, and I'm listening to 13 songs we did, and each time I listen, there's, like, song X pops out, and it's like, "Nope, nope, nope," you know, and I try, "Maybe if I put it here, maybe if I make it the ninth song on the record instead of the second song," or whatever. Nope, nope, you know, and it reduces until it's the album it's supposed to be. Um, so yeah, I don't even sometimes I can't even remember what songs came fast or slow, you know, it's like I couldn't even tell you.
So, okay, which is maybe my next question won't apply, but on the new solo album, is there a song that distinctly you remember was the easiest to write? And then was there a song also that you wanted to give up on that was a real struggle? What was the hardest song to get through?
Well, it's interesting because this record was built of old score themes that I wrote maybe 15 years ago, and I loved these. I'd say most of the record was probably a 30 to 45-second piece of instrumental score that I had written that I always loved, got fired from the film, that I was working on the film with Brian Reitzel, who's a really great composer, and he plays drums and percussion on all the stuff. And I loved all the stuff. And, you know, this was 15 years ago or something. And then a year ago, I was working on the song for the album called Lost Child that comes from a sample. It's the only song that didn't come from the scoring sessions. It's a sample. It started from a sample of a Maxine Brown song called Oh No, Not My Baby. And I was like working on that song. I was so into that song. I was like, just like so lost in it. And then it like reminded me of these other songs for some reason. It's like, don't forget about the score songs. It gave me that message. I was like, okay. So I got those sessions out. And I had tried over the years with this song or that song to put vocals on it or try something with it, you know, and nothing really ever went anywhere. And for whatever reason, it's like it all started pouring out. It's like I would take one idea and loop it or stretch it or chop it, and I'd go walk, and all these lyrics and all these vocals would come out, and I'd come back home and I'd record them. And it's like, it's funny because most of them were expansion, but there's one called Green Home that was super. It was like 20 minutes long of all of this exploration and jamming, and I cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, and I wanted it to be a journey, but eventually the vocals kind of led me to where, and then I added guitar solos and stuff to it. So uh, that's the thing, is I don't have a family, I don't have a partner, I don't have kids or anything. So the music is kind of my life. I mean, I've got a lot of great friends, I've got great biological family stuff, but so when I'm working with the music, it's such a joy to me and I'm so grateful. There's never any time when it's hard, or I'm like, if it becomes hard, I stop and I go read a book or I take a walk or something. It's always, I'm so grateful. I can almost cry talking about it. If I'm in there working with my muse, it's like the most beautiful thing. And yeah, sometimes it's frustrating and I can't finish a lyric or I can't finish an idea, but it's like, if I start to get frustrated, I give her a kiss and I press pause and I go read a book or something. It's like, so I can't say any of it was hard or easy. It just comes when it wants to come, because like so many of these ideas, I wanted them to come 10 years ago. I wanted to get hired for that film 15 years ago, but I got fired. You know what I mean? Like the universe wasn't ready for that music. It didn't want it, you know? And back then I was bummed. I was like, I guess I'm a failure. Guess I suck. I'll never be a music composer. I mean, a film scorer or whatever. I went down that hole. Woe is me. I've spent so many years of my life in a woe is me wormhole. I suck. I'll never be as good as Jimi Hendrix. I guess I'll never be a film scorer either. I guess I'll never be Bob Dylan. It's like the whole fucking time, this whole ride, I've just been beating myself to death, flogging myself the entire time until the last 4 or 5 years when I've been like just trying to love myself, and just trying to be like, whatever you're doing, man, somebody's going to love it. Somebody's going to hate it. Somebody's going to say it's crap and you're a hack. Somebody's going to love it and it's going to open their heart. And all you can do is just try and do your best and enjoy it, because you're going to be dead soon. It's like if I live to be 150, it's over soon. I'm not going to be Jim for long. So I'm trying to focus on like, what can I do to bring joy to the world? And what can I do to bring joy to myself in my own daily life? So the practice of music, I mean, when I get to practice music and it's flowing, it is just the most joyous experience.
All right, you mentioned books, so that's my last question. So you know, m- I am not an author person. When I finish a book and I'm always reading, my first thought is always, I want to get another voice in my head. I'm not the kind of person, just me, who says, I just read this by this author. Let me read something else by that author. I just want as many voices as possible. And I also don't reread books, but again, that's just me. So are you an author person? Are you a genre person? How do you decide what that book is you're going to read next?
Oh my God, I read so many books. I mean, that's like,
I know.
if I'm not working on music, I'm just reading. And I'm kind of a big fantasy guy, but I also love I'm a big fiction person, but the new Dave Eggers book, Contrapasto, is unbelievable. Like for anybody who loves art, especially visual art, uh, the way he talks about visual art and art school, and the way he deals with all of that is unbelievable. I love Ann Patchett. I just read her new novel, Whistler. That was unbelievable. I just read this book called The Correspondent by Virginia Evans that was unbelievable. I've been in a huge Brandon Sanderson wormhole, like like reading all of his book. He's an epic fantasy writer that I read his Mistborn sagas and his Stormlight archives and I just read his first book, Elantris. Uh I love Ursula K. Le Guin. I love Kurt Vonnegut. N.K. Jemisin is a great modern fantasy writer. Um, Octavia Butler, Philip K. Dick, Stephen King. I went through a huge Stephen King phase in the pandemic. I'd never read him, but I read his.
Really? You never read him before the pandemic?
No, but I read his book about writing, on writing.
Yeah. That's a
'Cause I'm
great
not a
book.
big horror guy. I don't deal well with horror and scary stuff like that. But I loved his book about writing so much, I started with The Stand and, just blew my mind, and then I've always loved the film version of The Shining, so I went and read The Shining, and I've always heard that he didn't like the film version, and his
Yeah.
quote about that is just like, I read The Shining again and then watched the film immediately when I was done, so I could kinda see what he was saying, and he says The Shining is like the most beautiful Cadillac. You walk into the showroom and you see the most beautiful Cadillac with all the bells and whistles, the perfect paint job, but you open the hood and there's no engine in the car. And
That's
I
right.
was, like, blown away, and he was like, "The Shining film ends in ice, and the book ends in fire." He's like, "The book has so much more heart and soul, and you love the characters," and, he was saying, like, the film is beautiful, it's unbelievable
Yeah.
work of art, but there's not as much heart and soul in it as there is in the book, and I really agreed with him on that. Because as a kid, when I heard him say he didn't like The Shining, I was like, "You don't like The Shining? What are you talking about, man?" But then
Right.
when I read him and watched it back to back, I mean, I still love the film, but I saw what he was saying.
So do you go by book recommendations by friends? I mean, or do you I just go to book review websites and say, "Oh, that sounds like a plot I'd like to read,"
I
and that's
keep
how
a
I do
note.
it.
I'm always listening to friends. Yeah, when friends tell me something at dinner, I write it down. If I don't keep a note app going, I'll never remember anything. So I just remember somebody says, "Oh my God, have you read this?" I'm like, "No." I just write it down. And then when I finish a book, I go back in. And one thing that I do a lot, because I read so much and I read so fast, if I love somebody's book, I'll go read all their books. I'll get into their world. Like somebody told me about Brandon Sanderson, and I started with his Mistborn series, and I read nothing but Brandon Sanderson for months. He's got so many books, and really same with any author. Once I read something, if I like the author, I'll go find all their books.
Have you ever heard of S.A. Cosby?
No.
So he's Stephen King's favorite writer now. He is from the kind of mountains of Virginia, and he writes outside of Richmond, and he writes about his actually on display right now in Obama's library.
Okay.
Obama had him on one of the, his year-end best list, but S period A period Cosby.
Okay. I just wrote
Um,
it down.
yeah, and Blacktop Wasteland, a bunch of books, but it's and I'm not a big crime person either, but it's it's kind of like these are crime-ish novels, but they take place in kind of the rural parts of Virginia.
Okay.
And he's all I mean, true full disclosure, I know him and so I'm biased, but he's an amazing writer and so definitely check him out. He's
I'm
got
excited. Yeah.
yeah,
Love to. I love Stephen King's crime stuff. So if Stephen
yeah.
King likes his crime stuff, I'm sure it's amazing.
Stephen King's reviewed him in the New York Times, but I know that they're buddies now, but Stephen King loves him.
That's cool.
Yeah. All right, last question then. You're reading a book and you're not feeling it. Do you have to finish it or can you put it away and never come back?
Yeah, I'll put it away and never come back, especially if it's making me feel bad. Um, yeah, I usually know 10 to 30 pages in or something, if it's just still hadn't grabbed me. But that's the cool thing too about records and books. Sometimes you'll come back to it 10 years later and you'll love it. You'll be ready for it. And so my mind's always open to anything, especially if somebody has recommended it, like if you recommend the S.A. Cosby thing and I go get one and I read it and 30 pages in, I'm like, I don't know. It's like 10 years later, maybe I'll stumble across it again and it'll blow my mind and it'll be the perfect time. I love that. That's one of my favorite things about art. The first time I heard Pet Sounds, I didn't like it. You know what I mean? It's just like, and then, I hear it 10 years later and it, blows my mind like it blows everybody's mind, but I wasn't ready for it.
And that's it for today's episode. Thank you very much again to today's guest. And also thank you to Elena and Pat of the band Tennis, my good friends, Elena and Pat, for their intro and outro music that you're hearing right now. That is from their song Need Your Love. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have questions, comments, concerns, complaints, people you want me to interview, I read every email I get. You can contact me through the website or at ben@songwritersonprocess.com. I can't promise you I can respond. I get tons of emails, but I do read all of them. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have a great day.